A simple woman repairs engine for a millionaire. Next day, a luxury helicopter lands at her door. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. When Jolene stopped to help a stranded stranger on that dusty back road, she never imagined her grease-stained hands would unlock a door to an extraordinary future. What happened next will restore your faith in human goodness. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the weathered sign. Jolene's Auto Repair. Honest work. Fair prices. Inside the small garage, country music hummed softly as Jolene wiped her hands on an oil-stained rag. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls told the story of countless engines brought back to life. At 38, Jolene had built something precious in this quiet corner of the world. She'd inherited the garage from her father, along with his philosophy. Treat folks right, and they'll remember. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. Every wrench turn, every spark plug replacement was done with the kind of integrity that seemed rare these days. Her customers weren't wealthy, mostly farmers, teachers, and working families who stretched their dollars thin. Jolene understood struggle. She'd been there herself, making tough choices between groceries and rent. That's why she never charged old Mrs. Henderson full price, and why she kept payment plans flexible for single parents. The garage wasn't much to look at. Concrete floors stained with decades of oil, fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally, and a coffee pot that had seen better years. But it was hers. Every tool had its place. Every part was organized just so. This organized chaos was Jolene's sanctuary, where she could diagnose problems others couldn't solve. Her reputation had grown slowly, built on word of mouth and genuine care. That Jolene, folks would say, she's got magic in those hands. Truth was, she just paid attention, really listened when engines talked to her. She'd learned that most problems had simple solutions if you took time to understand them. This particular Tuesday started like any other. She had already changed oil in 2 pickup trucks and was elbow-deep in a transmission rebuild when her phone buzzed. Mrs. Patterson needed her old sedan looked at, making funny noises again. Jolene smiled. Mrs. Patterson's sedan was older than some college students, but with proper care, it still had miles left to give. She glanced at the family photo on her workbench. Her parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful. They taught her that success wasn't measured in dollar signs, but in lives touched, problems solved, and communities strengthened. As she reached for her socket wrench, Jolene couldn't have imagined that before this day ended, she'd encounter someone whose life philosophy differed drastically from her own. The afternoon heat was building, and Jolene stepped outside for fresh air. Little did she know, destiny was already rumbling down that dusty back road, disguised as an expensive car with engine trouble. The gleaming silver sedan appeared through the heat shimmer like a mirage. It wasn't the kind of car you'd expect on this back road. Too pristine, too expensive for these parts. The vehicle coughed once, twice, then coasted to a stop right in front of Jolene's garage, with steam rising from under the hood. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like he'd walked out of a boardroom. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable despite the heat. Even his shoes gleamed with a polish that probably cost more than most folks' monthly grocery bill. He carried himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to having problems solved for him. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying the refined accent of private schools and exclusive clubs. "I'm having some mechanical difficulties. Would you happen to know where I might find assistance?" Jolene wiped her hands on her rag and approached the steaming vehicle. "Well, you found it," she said with a friendly smile. "Jolene's the name. Fixing engines is my game. What seems to be the trouble?" The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Richardson, looked skeptical. His eyes swept over Jolene's modest garage, taking in the peeling paint and humble surroundings. "Oh, I don't wish to impose. Perhaps you could direct me to a more established facility." Jolene chuckled good-naturedly. "Sir, the nearest established facility is 40 miles down the highway. But if you'd rather push your car that far in this heat, be my guest." She popped the hood and immediately heard the telltale whistle of a blown radiator hose. "Though I should mention, you've got coolant leaking all over creation right about now." Mr. Richardson's facade cracked slightly. He was clearly out of his element, stranded in unfamiliar territory without his usual resources. "I have an important meeting this evening," he admitted, checking his expensive watch. "This couldn't have happened at a worse time." "When's it ever a good time for car trouble?" Jolene asked rhetorically, already assessing the damage. "Good news is this ain't rocket science. Your upper radiator hose gave up the ghost, probably the heat and age. I've got the part you need, and we can have you back on the road in 20 minutes. She noticed his hesitation and added gently, "Look, I know I don't look like much, but I've been turning wrenches since I was 12. My daddy always said, 'Judge a mechanic by their work, not their workspace. Give me 20 minutes, and if you're not satisfied, I won't charge you a dime.'" Something in her straightforward manner must have convinced him. Mr. Richardson nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but I must warn you, I'm expected at a rather important business dinner." As Jolene gathered her tools, she couldn't help but notice the man's discomfort. He stood stiffly beside his car, clearly uncomfortable with the rural setting, and uncertain about trusting his expensive vehicle to someone he'd probably never imagined could help him. His phone buzzed constantly. "Business calls," he answered with increasing frustration. "Might as well sit in the shade," Jolene suggested, pointing to an old folding chair by the garage entrance. "This won't take long, but there's no sense standing in the sun." Mr. Richardson perched awkwardly on the chair, still fielding calls and checking his watch every few minutes. Meanwhile, Jolene worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd performed this repair countless times. Her movements were precise, confident, unhurried, despite his obvious anxiety. As she worked, the gulf between their worlds couldn't have been more apparent. His urgency and impatience clashing with her steady, methodical approach to problem-solving. Steam hissed softly as Jolene drained the old coolant, her practiced hands moving with the rhythm of someone who'd performed this dance 1,000 times. Mr. Richardson watched from his shaded perch, initially with skepticism, then with growing curiosity as she worked. "You know," Jolene said, wrestling with a stubborn clamp, "most folks drive right past this garage without a second glance. Funny how a little car trouble can change your whole perspective on a place." Mr. Richardson shifted uncomfortably. "I must admit, I wasn't expecting to find, well, someone with your apparent expertise in such a remote location." Jolene glanced up with an amused smile. "What were you expecting? Some good old boy with grease under his nails and tobacco juice in his beard." She loosened the damaged hose with a satisfying grunt. "Don't worry, I get that a lot. Folks see a woman in coveralls and assume I'm just playing dress-up." "That wasn't my implication," he said quickly, though his wreathing face suggested otherwise. "Of course not," Jolene replied with gentle humor. She pulled out the split hose and showed him the damage. "See this crack? Your hose probably started small, maybe months ago. Heat and pressure worked on it day after day, until finally, pop. Sometimes the smallest problems become the biggest headaches if you ignore them long enough." As she installed the new hose, Mr. Richardson found himself relaxing despite himself. There was something soothing about watching someone work with such quiet competence. "You seem to enjoy your work," he observed. "Love it," Jolene confirmed, tightening connections with careful precision. "Every engine's got its own personality, its own way of telling you what's wrong. Most people think it's just nuts and bolts, but there's an art to it. You've got to listen. Listen. Sure. She topped off the coolant and wiped her hands. Take your car here. Expensive, well-maintained, probably pampered its whole life. But even the fanciest machines need attention. They'll whisper to you if you know how to hear them. Mr. Richardson's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it with visible stress. I'm sorry. This is an important call. Go ahead, Jolene said, starting the engine to check her work. We're almost done anyway. As he spoke in hushed, urgent tones about profit margins and acquisition targets, Jolene couldn't help but notice the tension in his voice, the way his shoulders carried weight that had nothing to do with the broken-down car. When he finished the call, she saw him rub his temples as if fighting a headache. Rough day, she asked sympathetically. He looked surprised by her concern. Business pressures, he said vaguely. Nothing a small-town mechanic would understand. Instead of taking offense, Jolene smiled. You'd be surprised what a small-town mechanic understands. Pressure's pressure, whether it's in a radiator hose or a boardroom. Both can blow if you don't tend to them properly. Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. How do you do it? He asked suddenly. Stay so calm, content. Jolene wiped her hands thoughtfully. Well, I reckon when you've got work you love, people you care about, and a roof over your head, what more do you really need? Sure, I'm not rich in money, but I'm rich in other ways. Sleep well at night, you know. The engine hummed smoothly now, purring like a contented cat. There you go, she announced. Good as new. That'll be 40 for the hose and labor. Mr. Richardson stared at her in disbelief. 40, are you certain? Mr. Richardson pulled out his wallet, still shaking his head in amazement. 40 for professional service that would cost 3 times that in the city? You're either very bad at business or very good at life. Jolene laughed warmly. Daddy always said there's a difference between making a living and making a killing. I sleep better with the first one. He extracted a crisp $100 bill. Please keep the change. You've saved my evening, possibly my entire deal. But Jolene gently pushed the money back toward him. 45 is the fair price, so 40 is what I'll take. The change won't make me richer, but knowing I charged honestly will. Mr. Richardson stared at the refused money as if it were a foreign concept. I don't understand. In my world, everyone wants more. Always more. Maybe that's the problem with your world, Jolene said softly, pulling 2 20s and a 5 from his wallet herself. Sometimes enough is plenty. As he prepared to leave, Mr. Richardson hesitated by his car door. You know, I've built an empire worth hundreds of millions. I own properties in 12 countries, employ thousands of people. But I can't remember the last time anyone refused my money or treated me like just another person. Well, Jolene said, wiping her hands one final time. That's exactly what you are. Just another person who needed help. The fancy suit and expensive car. Don't change that. He extended his hand for a shake, and for a moment the gulf between their worlds seemed to narrow. Thank you, Jolene, for the repair, for the perspective, for treating me with such kindness. Drive safe now, she called as he started the engine. And remember, when that hose starts whispering again, listen to it before it has to shout. Mr. Richardson drove away slowly, glancing back at the modest garage in his rearview mirror. Something had shifted during that brief encounter, though he couldn't quite name it. The woman in coveralls had fixed more than his radiator hose. She'd cracked something inside him he thought was permanently sealed. Jolene watched the expensive sedan disappear into the heat shimmer, then turned back toward her garage. She had Mrs. Patterson's transmission to finish, and daylight was burning. But as she picked up her wrench, she found herself thinking about the sad weight she'd seen in that successful man's eyes. Rich in everything except what matters, she murmured to herself, then got back to work. She had no way of knowing that her simple act of integrity had planted a seed that would soon bloom into something extraordinary. The morning started like any other. Jolene arrived at the garage with coffee and a day's worth of work ahead of her. Mrs. Patterson's transmission was calling her name, and old Joe Hendricks needed his pickup inspected before month's end. She'd almost forgotten about the stranded businessman from yesterday. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in their quiet corner of the world. A rhythmic thumping that grew louder by the second, making the garage windows rattle in their frames. Jolene stepped outside, shading her eyes against the morning sun. A helicopter, sleek, black, and obviously expensive, was descending toward the empty field beside her garage. The rotor wash sent dust swirling in all directions, bending the tall grass like waves. Jolene had never seen anything like it. Not here in their peaceful valley. The aircraft touched down with surprising gentleness, and the engines wound down to silence. A man in a pilot's uniform emerged first, followed by someone Jolene recognized, Mr. Richardson, though he looked different somehow, less rigid, more relaxed. "Good morning, Jolene," he called out as he approached, having to raise his voice over the settling dust. "I hope you don't mind the dramatic entrance." Jolene stood there, wrench still in hand, trying to process what she was seeing. "Mr. Richardson, what in the world?" "I had some business in the area," he said with a slight smile. "Thought I'd stop by to thank you properly for yesterday." "Thank me, sir. It was just a radiator hose. Nothing special about that." But something in his expression suggested otherwise. "May I?" He gestured toward the garage, and Jolene nodded, still bewildered. As they walked toward her workspace, Mr. Richardson seemed to take in every detail. The organized tools, the family photos, the simple honesty of the place. "You know, after I left yesterday, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about what you said regarding enough being plenty." Jolene set down a wrench, focusing on his words. "It got me thinking too," she admitted. "About that weight you carry. Success ain't supposed to feel that heavy, is it?" "No," he said quietly. "It isn't. Which brings me to why I'm here." The helicopter sat silent in the field like a sleeping giant, its presence transforming the familiar landscape into something from a dream. Whatever Mr. Richardson had come to say, Jolene could sense it was going to change everything. "I've been successful in business," he continued. But then, yesterday I met someone successful in life. That's a rarer gift than you might think." Mr. Richardson reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, setting it carefully on Jolene's workbench. "Inside this envelope is a cashier's check for $200,000, he said simply. Jolene's wrench clattered to the concrete floor. "I'm sorry, what? You refused a $55 tip yesterday. Today I'm offering you $200,000, not as payment for the repair, but as an investment in something precious I thought was extinct. Genuine integrity." Jolene's legs felt weak. She sank onto her rolling stool, staring at the envelope as if it might explode. "Mr. Richardson, I can't. That's impossible. People like me do exactly what I want," he interrupted gently. "And what I want is to invest in someone who values honesty over profit, who treats strangers with kindness, who finds contentment in simple work well done." He began pacing her small garage, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete. "Do you know what I did last night after leaving here? I canceled my business dinner. First time in 20 years I've put something ahead of a deal. Instead, I sat in my hotel room thinking about a woman who charged $45 for work worth hundreds, who refused extra money because it wasn't fair. Jolene's hands trembled as she touched the envelope. But why? I don't understand. Because you reminded me of someone I used to be, Mr. Richardson said, his voice carrying unexpected emotion. 30 years ago, I was a young man with principles. Somewhere along the way, I lost that person in pursuit of more zeros in my bank account. Yesterday, for 20 minutes, I met him again through your eyes. He stopped pacing and faced her directly. I've spent decades accumulating wealth, but you showed me something I'd forgotten existed. Wealth of spirit. When you refused my tip, you gave me something more valuable than any business deal I've ever closed. Jolene stood up slowly, her mind reeling. Richardson, this is life-changing money. But I didn't do anything special. I just treated you like I'd want to be treated. Exactly, he said with a sad smile. Do you realize how rare that is in my world? How long it's been since someone looked at me and saw just another person who needed help? She stared at the envelope, then at the helicopter in her field, then back at this man who was offering to transform her entire existence. What do you want in return? Nothing, he said simply. Well, perhaps one thing. Keep being exactly who you are. Keep fixing engines with integrity. Keep treating people with kindness regardless of their bank accounts. Keep being the reminder that goodness still exists in this world. Jolene felt tears prick her eyes. I could expand the garage, hire help, maybe even take care of Mrs. Henderson's car payments. Help those single parents who struggle with repair bills. Keep being the person who makes this community a little bit better. He smiled warmly. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. As the reality sank in, Jolene felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of kindness being shown to her. How do I thank you for something like this? Mr. Richardson picked up her wrench and handed it back to her. By staying exactly who you are. By remembering that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. You fixed my car yesterday, Jolene. But more importantly, you fixed something in me I thought was broken forever. The helicopter engines began to wind up again, filling the morning air with their powerful thrum. Mr. Richardson extended his hand one more time. Thank you, he said simply, for showing a lost man the way home. And that's how one woman's simple kindness changed 2 lives forever. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with ordinary moments of human decency. What acts of unexpected kindness have you witnessed? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's remind the world that goodness still ripples outward. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of hope and humanity. Until next time, keep spreading kindness wherever your journey takes.